and a degree in natural language processing, which is very good for the community and for all the work that she does, which is also considerable. She's also founding editor and a co-editor of the International Journal of Learner Corpus Research, which often publishes very relevant material to our community and also to the larger conference that our graduate student conference here is sort of like a tiny little, well, it's not tiny and little, but it's an associate. She co-edited 2 handbooks which are relevant to the larger picture, which is a practical handbook of corpus linguistics and the Routledge handbook of second language acquisition, and Corpora, which brings together something that I found interesting, is that the learner corpus research community with the second language acquisition community. So her work sort of tries to formulate and bring together communities in a way. Other than that, she also has done research on academic writing. She also, in the context of the work or the work cycle that we also heard a lot so far during the conference of producing corpora. So there is the International Corpus of Learn English, where she was part of the team that produced it. She also does a lot for disentangling terminology. So work on, in particular, on disentangling phraseological web, just to sort of make things clear. Once you have your corpora, once you have your tools, once you have your terminology. Insofar, having someone talk here gives all of us, and in particular the younger audience, the new research, the researchers of tomorrow, the possibility to have someone talk and listen to who has an experience in sort of the widest scope of the possibilities that are relevant to our research here. Last but not least, she's also founding member of the Learner Corpus Research Association, which is basically the mother association hosting our conference. And now I'll give over the floor to Magali, who will be talking on bringing the law of comparative judgment into the methodological toolbox of learner corpus research.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Egan, for this very nice introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. And before I start, let me thank the organizers for inviting me today. I also want to thank them all for hosting this virtual event, which has been a real success. And so now my slides are not working anymore. Okay. So congratulations to the EURAC Research local team. Well done, Fabio, Ariana, Elena, Marta, Jenny, Ivarts, Egan, and Paolo, and special thanks to Olga. The main objective of my talk today is to introduce the methods of comparative judgment to the learner corpus research community and demonstrate its usefulness for enriching L2 data with proficiency scores that are often absent from or measured in relatively unreliable ways in currently available learner corpora. I will report on a number of studies that we have conducted within the framework of the Crowdsourcing Language Assessment Project, CLAP for short, to investigate whether a crowd of judges is able to assess learner text in a CJ task with high reliability and concurrent validity. I will also briefly sketch out the next steps. And in the conclusion, I will argue that CJ, so comparative judgment, may also serve to elicit scores and rankings of productions for other multidimensional constructs that have proved difficult to define and operationalize in the field of L2 research. Comparative judgment is a form of language, it's a form of assessment in which pieces of student work are presented in pairs to judges. And these pieces of student work, they can really be of any kind. They can be geography essays, academic writing, mathematical problem-solving exercises. So they are presented in pairs to judges who have the task of deciding which of the two items is better. The technique of CJ relies on the assumption that people are able to compare two performances more easily and reliably than to assign a score to an individual performance. This seems to be all the more true when it comes to assessing complex constructs such as writing or text quality. A second critical assumption underpinning CJ, its reliance on holistic judgment. Judges do not receive criteria to guide their judgment process, but at best a general description regarding the competence to be assessed. So in this example that you have on the screen, for example, we didn't give any kind of criteria. We just asked which of the two texts is a more advanced piece of second language writing. Through the accumulation of many such paired comparisons conducted by a team of judges, it is possible to generate a scale which ranks each item from the weakest to the strongest. CJ has developed into a popular methodology in various domains of research and practice, and most particularly in educational assessment, where it is increasingly being valued for making reliable the assessment of skills that are currently problematic. And here I'm quoting Polit 2012. For example, the method has been used to assess geography essays, participation in simulation games, translations, research summaries, interpretation, and exercises in statistics, for example. CJ has also been used for the assessment of writing quality, a multidimensional and complex construct for which CJ tasks have already been reported to produce reliable and valid results, at least when comparing L1 texts. For example, in a study by Widone et al. 2020, which described the CJ assessment of more than 55,000 English L1 texts written by UK primary school students, the authors reported a mean reliability of between 0.85 and 0.91 across various year groups. Similarly, Helsinger and Humphrey, 2010 and 2013, reported reliability levels above 0.95 and correlations with rubric-based assessment of 0.9 or higher for the assessment of narrative, descriptive, and argumentative essays in an Australian context. The construct validity of CJ has also been the focus of just a few studies that have explored the aspects of text quality that judges consider when making comparative judgments by asking them to either take notes or think aloud, explaining their decisions. The different studies reported that a large majority of the comments were indeed construct relevant. All areas of the target competence description were mentioned to some extent, but the majority focused on text argumentation and organization. Research into L2 writing assessment has been slower to emerge. When we started exploring the methods, we couldn't really identify much relevant literature. Since then, we've come across two studies that report very different levels of reliability and concurrent validity. Sims et al. 2020 compared CJ with rubric-based marking for a set of 60 English argumentative essays written by students in an intensive English program. They reported a reliability of around 0.9 for both novice judges, so undergraduate TESOL students, and experts, so trained raters, after around 11 comparisons per text. Correlations with rubric-based grades produced by the same judges were also strong. By contrast, Sahin 2021 reported on the CJ assessment of 35 L2 English paragraphs on the topic, the cause of sleeping disorders, and reported that after around 20 comparisons per text conducted by instructors from an English course, the reliability was only of 0.72. And while this can be viewed as still quite a high reliability, it is not as high as in Sims et al. So correlations with prior scores for the same text were also much lower. So these findings are weaker than those reported by Sim et al. And suggest a need for further research. And I strongly believe we need more research into CJ for second or foreign language assessment, because proficiency is one of the most important constructs in second language research. Yet its measurement has not always received the attention it deserves. And practices of proficiency level assignment have been the subject of continued criticism. In learner corpus research, more particularly, Carlson's 2012 review of some of the most commonly used methods of proficiency level assignments of text showed that many learner corpora still relied on variables such as institutional status or year of study as a proxy for proficiency, while these external criteria are largely regarded as unreliable. To address these criticisms, the Andres Frack's corpus, so ASK for short, compilers, were among the first to adopt a systematic a posteriori text-based approach to proficiency grounded in the professional field of language assessment. Among other things, the ASK texts were rated by a minimum of 5 trained raters. Estimates of rater severity and rater reliability were also used to provide feedback to the raters and evaluate the rating procedure. While this approach is undoubtedly exemplary, the drawback that was also identified by the authors is definitely the time and costs required. And this is a real challenge for all of us who are interested in collecting and using learner corpora. We want reliable and valid proficiency measurements, such as the scores that results from the assessment of text by a relatively large group of trained raters, not just 1 or 2 raters, but a group of raters. But we usually have very little time and no money. So how do we go about it? In the crowdsourcing language assessment project, we wanted to explore the use of comparative judgment combined with crowdsourcing as a way to address this challenge. Crowdsourcing refers to the practice of soliciting contributions from a large group of people or the general public, rather than from traditional suppliers. Here, the professional language testers, for example. As will become clearer in the next slides, in the CLAP project, we first adopted a community-based definition of the crowd before experimenting more with the use of a crowdsourcing platform. I'd like to mention here that the idea of combining CJ with crowdsourcing most probably emerged thanks to our participation to the European Network for Combining Language Learning with Crowdsourcing Techniques, led by HURAC members Lionel Nicolas and Verena Lidding between 2017 and 2021. So a big thank you to both of them for coordinating this network. Our main objective is to answer this question: can crowdsourcing and CJ be combined to generate accurate, reliable, and valid ratings for learner corpus texts? CLAP started as a collaboration with 2 of my PhD students back then, Rachel Rubin and Nate van der Weert. And in our first study, we adopted a community-based approach to crowdsourcing and recruited 43 judges, language students, language teachers, professors, etc., via mailing lists and personal contacts. The European network was instrumental here again, as many members participated in our study. So a second big thank you to Lionel and Verena. The judges compared 50 essays from the ETS corpus of non-native written English. These essays were all written by learners whose L1 was French and written on the same prompt. And on average, the length of these texts was relatively short, somewhere between 270 words. Importantly, each text comes with a measure of academic English proficiency. So the score levels from low to high represent the full range of proficiency, so from beginners to advanced learners, and are the combined assessment of 2 professional raters. And in this first study, we managed to get 20 comparisons per text. The scale separation reliability for this experiment was 0.95. This means that rank ordering the 50 essays from the text written by the least advanced speaker to the text written by the most advanced speaker resulted in a writing quality scale with very high reliability. We explored concurrent validity with a linear model with rank order as the dependent variable and proficiency level as the independent variable, and the model was significant and accounted for a moderate amount of variance in the rank order. The nature of the effects of proficiency level is relatively straightforward, as shown on this graph. There is a significant tendency such that lower, medium, and higher rank ordering correlate with low, medium, and high proficiency, respectively, as reported in the ETS corpus of non-native written English. And if we want to compare these results with those reported by Sims et al. Or Sahin, well, these results correspond to a Spearman correlation of 0.72, so we're more in line with Sahin's results. After this first study, however, we felt that, the study raised more questions than it answered, really. The data set we used was made up of relatively short text, covered a broad proficiency spectrum, and concerned only one essay prompt. So what if we used CJ to assess texts that are more similar in terms of proficiency? What if these texts were also longer and written on different topics? Little is known really about how CJ performs under more challenging conditions, but learner corpora typically feature these more challenging conditions. So the CJ literature has also often compared the reliability of comparisons made by novices versus experts. And novices here have to be understood as students most of the time. But what if we adopted a truly crowdsourcing approach and recruited judges on a crowdsourcing platform? Last but not least, we have started exploring the reliability and concurrent validity of CJ for L2 writing quality. But what about a construct validity? Can we be certain that our judges have a broad enough understanding of the construct of proficiency? These are all the questions that we wanted to answer in a 2-year research project funded by the Belgian Fund for Scientific Research, entitled Comparative Judgment for Large-Scale Proficiency Rating in L2 Research, Task Conditions, and Their Impact on Reliability and Validity. And within this project, I was lucky enough to hire Peter Thwaites, a brilliant postdoctoral researcher who has really been the driving force behind the different studies I'm going to report on today. In a first study, we focused on text characteristics and aimed to answer the following research questions. Can judges reliably assess learner texts that are longer and more homogeneous in proficiency? Can they reliably assess learner texts when the topics are diverse, and to what extent are scores generated in these trials comparable with scores generated by rubric-based assessment. To answer these research questions, we ran two comparative judgment tasks in which we used learner text sampled from the International Corpus of Learner English. Echo texts are much longer on average than the text used in the original study. They have also typically been described as text written by intermediate to advanced students. So compared to the first study, they represent a more homogeneous set of texts in terms of proficiency too. So in the first CJ task, we investigated the first research question related to the effect of text length and homogeneity of text in terms of proficiency. In the second CJ task, we added one extra layer of complexity and explored the effect of topic variability through comparisons of text written as a response to 5 different topics. As shown on the slide, the results suggest that CJ remains reliable under those more challenging conditions. In both studies, the final SSR level of 0.82 is beyond the threshold of 0.8 suggested to indicate good dependability of scores, while the near identical SSR levels in the 2 studies suggest that CJ was no more difficult when used to evaluate text on different topics than on just one. This being said, we also note 2 important differences between the 2 tasks and our first study. The SSR levels, while still good, are lower in these more challenging tasks. And importantly, it also took more comparisons per text to reach the threshold of 0.8. This may partly be explained by the different types of algorithm used in the 2 studies, with the adaptive algorithm used in the first study currently being criticized for potentially inflating reliability levels. So that's the reason why we changed between the original study, and these more recent studies. Nonetheless, compared to other CJ studies, these results are clearly at the slower end of the spectrum, with many comparisons needed to reach an SSR of 0.8 compared to the average of 19 to 20 comparisons reported in a meta-analysis conducted by Verhavert et al. In 2019, for example. To answer research question 3 about the correlation between CJ ranks and rubric-based scores, we first needed to have a set of echo text graded using the Cepher writing rubric. For reasons that will become clearer by the end of this presentation, we decided to have a sample of 500 echo text triple rated. We hired a group of raters who all had a minimum of 5 years of experience teaching or evaluating learners at Cepher levels B1 to C2, and at least an undergraduate degree in TESOL or applied linguistics. Raters took a 2-hour training session with our collaborator and co-author, Harry Charalambos, and the ratings were analyzed with the many faceted rash measurement model to produce a final subset of 433 texts rated with high reliability. For the 2 tasks, Spearman correlation showed that the CJ ranks and the rubric-based scores were significantly correlated, and that the effect was large according to Plonsky and Oswald 2014 benchmarks for L2 research. So for task 1, the Spearman correlation is 0.65, and for task 2, it is 0.67. However, both tasks explain slightly less variance in the data set than reported in the original study. So Paquot et al. 2022. It's around 45% instead of 52%. In terms of interim conclusion, the results of the two CJ tasks suggest that longer, more homogeneous texts appear to be harder for judges to distinguish, which affect reliability and validity, as well as the number of comparisons required to reach satisfactory reliability. The influence of text length and proficiency span cannot be definitely separated from the present data, since our study did not allow us to examine texts which were long but covered a broad proficiency span, for example. However, as we discuss in our article, there is more empirical and theoretical support for an influence of proficiency span than for text length. By contrast, the fact that there were more topics in the second task did not seem to add to this difficulty. So everything considered, I think we can conclude for now that CJ appears to remain effective for grading more challenging text and achieve satisfactory evaluations, provided we are happy with the increased number of comparisons that this entails. In a second study that we launched around the same time as the one I just described now, but for which data was so much quicker to collect, we thought to explore whether community-driven judgments of proficiency were the only option for us, or whether it would be possible to adopt a broader definition of the crowd and collect proficiency judgments from a crowdsourcing platform. So we therefore aim to answer the following research questions. Can judges recruited through an online crowdsourcing platform reliably assess learner text in a CJ task? To what extent do scores generated by these participants compare with the scores generated by rubric-based rating? And to what extent do these scores correlate with community-driven judgments of proficiency? The study is a partial replication of Paquot et al. 2022 in that it makes only one significant change to the methods used in the original. That change is the replacement of Paquot et al. Crowdsourcing approach, in which members of the applied linguistic community were targeted, with a more traditional crowdsourcing approach using the online crowdsourcing platform Prolific. I don't have the time to go into all the details about how we recruited judges on Prolific, but there are a number of important aspects to the study that I think deserve to be mentioned. First, we decided to filter Prolific participants so that only native speakers of English could participate. And our rationale for this decision was to limit the variability at the level of the judges, given that the majority of Prolific participants are native speakers of English. And second, among the Prolific participants who were interested in this task, because Prolific members, they kind of decide that they want to participate to your experiment, they apply for it. They are, among these Prolific participants who were interested in our task, they are actually language examiners and teachers. In fact, they accounted for 27% of all our judges. Our results suggest that judges recruited through Prolific can reliably assess learner text. So the SSR for the study was 0.94, which is about the same value than the one reported in the original study. Our results also showed that ETS scores explained a moderate amount of variance in the CJ-based rank order. So again, this figure is very similar to the variance explained by the corresponding model in the original study too. So the study where we targeted a community-based crowdsourcing approach. The third research question was tested using a Spearman correlation again, and the Spearman correlation revealed that the rank orders from the two studies were also strongly correlated. In our article, we discussed some differences between the two studies and between the two groups of judges, but in general, this indicates a high level of agreement between the two sets of judges. So in terms of interim conclusion 2, all in all, the results suggest that the set of judges recruited via Prolific was able to generate a highly reliable rating scale with an SSR level nearly identical to that of the members of the applied linguistic community used in the original study. In addition, these grades were significantly associated with the rubric-based assessments of the text provided in the ETS corpus. They also correlated strongly with the scale produced by the community-driven judgments of proficiency in the original study, thereby demonstrating their concurrent validity. So together, these findings suggest that CJ remains effective for grading learner text, even though judges are recruited through a crowdsourcing platform like Prolific. Importantly, the process of generating this data was quite efficient in terms of time and cost compared with other attempts to generate grades for learner corpus text. So the 370 comparisons that we needed took around 12 hours to collect at a total cost of £336. By comparisons, in our original study, so the community-based CJ approach allowed data to be collected at 0 cost, but required several months for the submission of sufficient judgments. Finally, based on the results of the two studies I just described briefly, the next obvious step for us was to check how Prolific judges would fare if given the more difficult task of comparing equal texts, so longer text written by BA, B1 to C2 EFL learners, so not the full proficiency range, on 5 different topics. So that's really the CJ task 2 that we used in our first study. And so we replicated CJ task 2 from our first study, but this time recruiting judges from Prolific. And we just got the results, so we haven't had the time to write this up yet, but we were very excited to see that it is possible to reach an SSR value above the 0.8 threshold for good reliability when we use a traditional definition of the crowd 2. Other metrics are also very similar to the results reported in Thwaites et al. This was only possible, however, by increasing the number of comparisons, with more than 30 rounds of comparisons needed to reach this threshold, which reinforces our assumption that it is more difficult to compare texts which are more similar in terms of their proficiency. So what's next for us? There is one crucial aspect that we haven't covered yet in our research agenda, that is the construct validity of CJ assessments. If CJ is to become an accepted tool for L2 writing assessment, it will be necessary to demonstrate that the decisions from which CJ scores derive are being made on a principled basis without excluding important aspects of text quality. Writing quality is a multi-dimensional construct, and it is important that judges consider other aspects of text quality than just, say, spelling errors and grammatical infelicities, for example. There are reasons to believe that this will be the case. As discussed earlier in this talk, research on the construct validity of CJ in L1 writing assessment suggests that CJ judges consider a wide range of aspects with regards to text quality. CJ judges have also been reported to pay closer attention to the higher order aspects of language quality, such as organization and argumentation, instead of focusing on the lower aspects, such as formal language conventions and errors and mistakes and so forth. So in Paquot et al. 2022, we examined several texts whose CJ rank was higher than would be expected based on their rubric-based grade. And we found some evidence of a similar pattern. We noted that some of the texts which were CJ ranked higher than their rubric-based grade would suggest were strong at the discourse level, at these aspects of argumentation and coherence, but they contained lower level weaknesses such as basic spelling errors that perhaps were evaluated with more severity by the professional raters at ETS. So the next step for us is to investigate the construct validity of comparative judgments of proficiency collected from a crowdsourcing platform such as Prolific, and how they would compare with community-based judgments of proficiency. There are different ways to explore the construct validity of CJ. Lesterer et al., for example, asked teachers to reflect upon their decision by answering the following question after each comparison. Can you briefly explain your decision? More recently, Chambers and Cunningham have employed a think aloud procedure in which the judges were asked to verbalize their thoughts while making their judgments. We haven't decided yet what the best approach would be for us, but that is really where we need and want to go next. So I would love to receive feedback on this issue if by any chance someone in the audience has experience with these two approaches or something to say about why we should opt for one approach instead of the other. Depending on the results of our investigations into the construct validity of prolific comparative judgments versus community-based judgments of proficiency, we will then be ready to launch a large-scale CJ task that will focus on, hopefully, a large set of ICL texts. We'll also be in a position to use the 430 or so texts that we triple rated as CEFA level benchmarks. The International Corpus of Learner English is one of the largest corpora of L2 English. It also comes with valuable metadata, but unfortunately, there is no reliable and valid measure of proficiency associated with the learner text. Ultimately, we hope that our work into language assessment, comparative judgment, and benchmarking will make it possible to produce reliable and valid proficiency measures for at least a subset of ICL text. I cannot make promise at this stage about the extent or the size of the ICL subset, but this is something where we want to go. In terms of conclusion, I'd first like to come back to perhaps why use CJ. And I would like to summarize the main advantages that I see in this technique. First, the technique is efficient. We haven't explored this topic ourselves, but Sims et al. 2020, for example, report that the CJ method is 52 seconds, so almost 1 minute per text, faster than rubric-based grading. If we use a crowdsourcing platform, comparisons are also extremely fast to collect. Second, the technique is reliable with SSR values above the 0.8 threshold for good dependability of scores. Third, there is also some evidence for the concurrent validity of CJ. And fourth, and I haven't discussed this yet, but the output of a CJ task is a rank order, thus a numeric variable, not an ordinal variable such as CEFA scales, for example. We believe that a CJ ranking provides a more powerful type of proficiency information than the categorical variables that are often used in L2 research. Theoretically, and drawing an analogy with Luke and Bialystok's 2013 statement that bilingualism is not a categorical variable, I would like to argue that language proficiency is not a categorical variable either. Statistically, a numeric variable also comes with more information value than categories such as low, medium, and high, or beginner, intermediate, and advanced, or the proficiency levels on the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. That being said, the drawback of CJ is its self-contained nature, and what we can gain in precision, we may lose in generalizability and comparability across studies. So for the method of CJ to thrive in L2 research, it will probably be necessary to anchor scores so as to situate ranked text against commonly used proficiency scales, such as those of the Common European Framework of References for Languages. One way of doing that is to follow Lesterhurst et al. 2017 suggestion to use an initial scale and a limited set of assessed text as benchmarks, so that text evaluated in a CJ task can be situated against this gold standard, or to use boundary scripts as done in Marshall et al. 2019. This standardized approach should also make the results of a CJ proficiency rating task usable in the more applied domains of L2 research, where it is often necessary to target groups of learners defined by their proficiency level when educators develop teaching curricula or resources or foreign language tests, for example. This drawback notwithstanding, I consider crowdsourced CJs as a powerful means to generate and democratize access to L2 enriched data. In the CLAP project, we focused on the construct of proficiency, which is of crucial importance in the fields of second language acquisition and learner corpus research. We believe our results are promising enough to argue that crowdsourced comparative judgments could be used more largely to enrich L2 data with a form of text-based proficiency assessment that is sorely lacking in some widely used learner corpora. It could also be used in learner corpus compilation projects for which there is no funding to get learner text triple rated according to the Cepher scale, for example. In future research, the decision to collect judgments from the applied linguistic community or to use a crowdsourcing platform to recruit judges will likely be guided by a number of criteria. In our first studies, we relied on the voluntary participation of members of the applied linguistic community to collect CJs. As a result, compared to traditional language assessment projects, the scores came at no cost, which came as a huge advantage. But the drawback was that we were dependent on the availability of community members, and it took some time to collect enough judgments. We started recruiting judges through a crowdsourcing platform because we quickly got worried that our reliance on the voluntary participation of members of the applied linguistic community would unlikely be sustainable as a long-term data collection method. By now, we have accumulated evidence for the reliability of crowdsourced judgments, but we still need to assess construct validity more carefully. Importantly, however, we also found that collecting crowdsourced CJs via a crowdsourcing platform can become quite expensive if the task is so challenging that it requires more comparisons. This being said, there are many other multidimensional constructs other than proficiency that have proved difficult to define and operationalize in the field of L2 research, and which I believe could be explored via CJ. In fact, over the last couple of years, a few studies have started doing so. And a few studies have been published that actually use CJ to rank multi-word units in terms of their perceived difficulty, to identify a core vocabulary for different CEFR levels, or to generate lexical diversity scores. There are potentially many more constructs that could be explored via CJ, including constructs such as fluency, complexity, non-native accents. For many of these constructs, CJ could be used to develop a common understanding of the construct by identifying the dimensions of such constructs and quantifying their contributions to human ratings. Personally, I'm hoping to start using the CJ technique in a new collaborative project together with Scott Jarvis, Nate van der Weert, and Peter Thwaites that would start in a year, and in which we will explore whether the theoretical construct of phraseological complexity that I defined in Paquot 2019, whether this construct is reflective of collective understandings of the linguistic phenomena we wish to measure with such a construct. Clearly, the potential for research and innovation is vast. And with these words, I thank you for your attention. I have two more slides. The first one is a slide about the International Journal of Learner Corpus Research. So if you allow me, I'd like to put my hats of co-editor of this journal for a short moment to encourage conference participants to submit their work to the journal. The journal is now indexed in the Emerging Sources Citation Index by the Web of Science. It belongs to the first quartile in the domain of education and in the domain of linguistics and language on CIMAGO Journal and Country Rank. It has published articles by prominent researchers in the field. So all these elements, I believe, should make it a valuable publication outlet for many of us. And as a follow-up to yesterday's Meet the Expert session with Steffi and Hilary, so the session on speaker categorization, please forgive me for a bit of self-promotion, but this talk is so important for me and for the team behind this project, as we really want to receive more feedback on this collaborative project that started a couple of years ago now. So if you're interested in discussing metadata and speaker categorization more, let's meet again on Monday for this online talk at the Corpus Linguistics and Applied Linguistics Research seminar series. Thank you very much again.